Okay, so when we talk about the political spectrum, just like I said earlier, one of the key things about political science is you're always trying to predict people's behavior. And so we have to label things. And we have to look at people and try to understand, like based on your orientation towards the government and based on the way you've been socialized, how do I think you're going to behave and what kind of decisions do I think you're going to make? So that hopefully somehow, some way, you'll support the candidate or the politician or the policy or etc. So the political spectrum is based on your attitude towards change. And really in our country, more specifically, that has to do with more or less in terms of getting to the framer's intent. Remember, we talked about that idea of like, what does the framer's intent mean? So the framer's intent is this idea of, well, what did the Constitution say? How did we originally handle a situation? And then where do I look for an answer? Okay. So in the political spectrum, we have 5 basic categories of political thought. In our country, if you move towards the left, that means you want more change. If you move towards the right, that means you want less change. So this is more about doing things the way the Constitution said, or doing things the way they were done in the past. This is about looking for new or different. So your category on the far left, you can call that a radical, or some people like to call it a revolutionary. Arvin, tell me, when we talked about revolution, how did we define it? What did we say a real revolution is?
Like, when you form a new government, like, government is making new laws and new protective stuff for people.
Okay, so
they're trying to increase the level of people's satisfaction with the government.
Okay, usually that's why they're trying to raise people's satisfaction. But how is the new government different than the old government? In a real revolution.
Like, they're trying to make it, like, more open so, like, people will know what is going on with their government.
That's what tends to happen a lot of times. Eric feels like you had something to say. No? Okay. In a real revolution, you take an existing system and you replace it with something completely different, right? So in a person that's radical or a person that's revolutionary, they're advocating complete and total change. They want things to be done completely different than the way they've been done in the past. Similar situation. So it could be immigration, it could be healthcare, it could be education, it could be race relations, it could be any kind of whatever their perceived societal problem is. And they say that we've got to do something completely different than the way we've done it before. Okay? So an example from American history would be the Black Panthers. Peyton, what do you remember about the Black Panthers? Like, why would I put them there under radical or revolutionary? Do you remember the Black Panthers? Learning about the Black Panthers last year?
Yeah, I remember. Like, they were they violent? I remember
They did advocate violence. What were they trying to accomplish?
Equality.
Right. And wasn't that completely different than what America had experienced before? And the tactics with which they wanted to accomplish it were completely different, right? They didn't want to do things the way things had been done in the past. You guys learned about this in world history. Remember you talked about Karl Marx? True, real communism, because it's a completely different kind of political system. Okay. All right, so if the Black Panthers are radical and revolutionary, what do you think the other end of the political spectrum will be? If this is total change and complete change, what's this going to be? It's like going to be weird to say. It's going to be complete change backwards. So not change, you're going to go like you're going to devolve. You're going to go back to the way you used to be. Okay? So we're going to refer to that as a reactionary. That's not a word that people use a lot. You know, truth be told, like in our culture, we use radical and revolutionary all the time, but people don't really use this word reactionary very often. But it's as extreme as radical. It's just the other way of doing it. So a reactionary says the way that we have gone is wrong. This direction is problematic. We need to look to the past We need to look to the wisdom of the way things have been done in the past, and we need to reinstate those values and those ways of doing things. So, if the Black Panthers are radical, who is the opposite of the Black Panthers? Go all the way. Racist. Like, yes, but more than racist. Who's the opposite of the Black Panthers, you guys? The Klan, yeah. So does that make sense? Because you think about like what they were advocating, that was a complete turn back to the past. And here's the thing, I've given you violent examples because they tend to be violent, but they don't have to be. I mean, I think that you can take anybody who is like extremely fundamental in their religious beliefs would go over here. And that doesn't have to be necessarily Christianity, any kind of religion. You know, you think about Amish people, right? I mean, that is a very kind of reactionary way of thinking. They're not trying to convert people. They're not trying to hurt people. They don't fly planes into buildings. None of that's happening. They're very content with their way of life, but it's a very extreme way of thinking in terms of like when they think of a problem, they think, well, let's do things the way they've always been done. So the reality is that this is not most people, right? Like this is your crazy aunt or uncle that's there at Thanksgiving that nobody really talks about. But at the end of the day, that's not what America is. We've talked about the fact that we are this slow, like evolving kind of democracy. We came out of this very gradual revolution. So we don't really live in a political system that fosters these kind of politicians. Rather, these are the labels that we're going to tend to use a lot in our country. Okay? So that is liberal. Over here we're going to put conservative. And in the middle, we're going to put a moderate. So we'll go conservative first. Talk about what a conservative is. A person who's a conservative sees value in tradition. They don't value change for the sake of change. And they really think that government should stick to what its original intention was. So from day one, what have I been telling you? The original Constitution, what was the purpose of our government? Not the Articles of Confederation, but what kind of powers did the national government have under this current Constitution? Tanner, what kind of powers did the government primarily have in the original Constitution?
They could control who they went to war with.
Okay, so military powers?
They could control, I guess, what's the word? It's like business, but
and economic powers. That's it. Under the Articles of Confederation, that's what they lack, so that's the kind of things they created. Most people who are conservative view that as the job of the government. They say government should stick to economics and like promoting economic growth and to keeping us safe and secure. That's really what they think it is. Now, your textbook also talks about this idea of social conservative. Did you pick up on that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did. Olivia, tell us, like, social conservative. What did that mean? Do you remember?
I have it in my notes. They believe that the government should support and further traditional moral teachings.
And so there was a time period in our history where that was kind of done. You know, we didn't talk about that so much because we were experiencing so much change, like with the civil rights movement, counterculture, all those things happening. But in the 80s, we revived that. And so social conservatism is like a very big part of our politics today. Like when I was a kid, people didn't make the assumption that if you were Christian, you were a Republican. But today, there's like an underlying assumption in our culture that somehow those things go together. But that's not always been the case. Like, you go back to my grandparents' generation, it wasn't that way at all. Like, they didn't necessarily tie religion to politics. Your religion would socialize you, but it wasn't the presence of religion would cause you to be conservative, or the presence would cause you to be, or the lack of would cause you to be liberal. So it's kind of changed, like, the modern-day perception of it. But a person who's conservative value a strong, secure state, and they want to encourage, like, free enterprise and economic growth. So the classic icon that we hold up today of being a conservative is Ronald Reagan. You know, and people today really kind of idolize him. You know, when history treats people better than they were treated when they were president. He was a very popular president, right? But when people talk about Reagan today, what they're talking about is the fact that he worked really hard to build the military, but more importantly that he worked really hard to cut taxes. and that he saw a lot of value in getting government out of people's lives. And remember, we talked about that idea of returning power to the states. What do we call that, David? Returning power to the states. Starts with D. Devolution. Yeah, that devolution, that getting... So it's that idea of like a return to true federalism, okay? All right. A liberal, then, is a person that advocates change to fix problems, okay? In our country, a liberal says there's a problem, government needs to take active steps to fix that problem. Liberals tend to not be as concerned with what level of government handles what. Liberals tend to think it's the objective of government to promote some kind of social and economic equality, and they think that that's basically what it is. So anytime you can think in history of like specifically significant domestic change, like where policies were changed a lot to try to take care of people in bad economic times, those tended to be liberal presidents. So your classic two examples I'm going to put are FDR. Okay. Shout out some of the things that FDR did that were liberal. Social Security. What'd you say? Right, like the New Deal, right? Okay, but here's the thing. That doesn't mean that FDR ideologically was like, I'm a liberal, and that's how I'm going to solve these problems. Nor did Reagan sit back and say, I'm a conservative, that's how I'm going to solve these problems. Reagan had some actually very liberal policies. One of his policies was to extend amnesty to immigrants that were in America. A lot of conservatives today would like balk at that idea. Whereas FDR, remember, he was also a wartime president. LBJ created a lot of liberal policies, Great Society, Civil Rights Act, affirmative action. There's so many things where the national government took over social service programs, but he was also a Vietnam War president, and committed hundreds of thousands of troops to stopping communism in Vietnam. So the reality is that we try to, when we look at these examples, these are classic definitions of ideological thought. But even the people that I tell you that are held up as icons of that political thought are not consistently 100% liberal or 100% conservative. And that's the problem with trying to label people, or that's why it's hard, because nobody truly fits in there. So when we talk about our modern day political system, it's probably more appropriate to say that this is a Democrat and that this is a Republican. So by that token, who becomes the most important voter in America? The moderate. Why, Olivia?
Oh, because they can go to that.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this disconnect. Like, are we ideological or are we moderate? I accept the evidence of moderation. Not everybody would agree with me, and I'm going to show you different perspectives, and you're going to accept what you choose to accept based on what your experience is and what your evidence is. But at the end of the day, what you're going to find is that politicians... Tonight there's a debate on CNN with all the Republican candidates. If you get a chance to watch it, one of the things that will be really interesting is to see the things that they're saying. And then, when the Republican Party chooses somebody next spring, to see how different the candidates' perspectives are. Because a lot of times, like right now, they're trying to motivate these people